I'm not saying that all the accusations against him were untrue, but I think it's worth being aware of the fact that a lot of the leading figures involved in whipping up this anger against Dominic Cummings are people who disagree with him very strongly ideologically. Hi, I wanted to do a quick video today looking at the Dominic Cummings story. He is accused of having breached the guidelines on the lockdown. I think there are two issues here, and that the failure to delineate between the two is meaning that a lot of people are getting their analysis slightly off. The first issue is, did he breach the guidelines? The second issue is this being weaponized by people who essentially hate Dominic Cummings because they disagree with his politics? I think it is to a certain extent. I think it's important to call that out and be aware of it when it's going on. So the first issue is, did Dominic Cummings, a senior government advisor, breach guidelines which were in place across the country at that time to stop people from coming into contact with other people and to allow people to social distance correctly and so on? If he does turn out to have breached those guidelines, I think that is arguably very hypocritical, and so it's understandable that people want to see him scrutinised for that and possibly feel very angry at the government for not having taken further action against him. So I think that's an understandable concern that many people would have, and I don't think it makes sense to blindly come out and defend him. At the same time, however, I don't think this story and the extent to which it's been covered by the media and the tone with which it's been covered can be explained simply by grassroots popular outrage at what Dominic Cummings has done. There are a lot of people who are annoyed by that, but I don't think the media are the perfect judges of exactly what the average person thinks. They repeatedly tend to get their judgment of that slightly off. On this issue, a lot of the media have been helping to whip up fury against Dominic Cummings on the basis of allegations which it now turns out are untrue and were asserted more or less as facts. The Mirror claimed that Dominic Cummings had gone to Durham twice. According to Dominic Cummings, he could be lying, but according to Dominic Cummings, that story is completely untrue. It didn't stop it being shared hundreds of thousands of times on social media by leading journalists in the country, and it made headline news, but it wasn't true. At the point at which that story was circulating, there were literally mobs of people outside his family house, screaming, basically demanding he get fired, abusing him verbally. Again, and these mobs were praised by an MP, maybe more, but at least one MP that I know of, Emily Thornberry, praised these mobs on social media. You've got mobs of people in the street outside someone's house, family house, on the basis partly of news stories which aren't true. And instead of calling that out as problematic or something which is not exactly what we want to see in a democratic society, this is being praised by MPs. Now, I don't think that is a good look. Actually, I think it's actively bad for public discourse and the social fabric. It's also worth bearing in mind that Emily Thornberry was a key Corbynista, and he got elected on the motto, as leader of the Labour Party, a gentler kind of politics, or kind of gentler politics, whatever. So it makes no sense to call for a kind of gentler politics whilst simultaneously tweeting and endorsing mobs of people who are rampaging around screaming at a person outside their family house on the basis of allegations which might not be true. There was also the story that he'd been investigated by the police. This was widely reported and turned out to be false. Now, none of this is to say that he hasn't breached the guidelines. I'm not saying that all the accusations against him were untrue, but I think it's worth being aware of the fact that a lot of the leading figures and key individuals who've been involved in whipping up this anger against Dominic Cummings are people who disagree with him very strongly ideologically. The Guardian, The Mirror, MPs who disagree with Brexit. Outrage culture and cancel culture basically overrides the presumption of innocence or the desire to at least hear the full facts before we demand that someone be removed from public life, fired from their job. I am not defending Dominic Cummings. I think that there are possibly issues with his statement he made. It could definitely turn out to be the case that he's done things that breach the guidelines, and I don't think that is necessarily defensible. And I do think it's valid for journalists to try to hold him to account for that, and for other politicians to try to hold him to account for that. And I also think it makes sense for members of the public to be annoyed by that. But there's a distinction to be made between justifiably feeling irritated by that story and the extent of the outrage we've seen and the way in which it's been whipped up and endorsed by people who just hate him because of his politics. One final point I wanted to make is that a lot of the media are saying, oh, this is the end of Dominic Cummings being able to claim that he's fighting against the elite because he's clearly a part of the elite now. I think that those people are missing the point, as they often tend to do. I'm not saying he's not part of an elite, but I think a lot of people in the public and more broadly just who are watching this story are aware of the fact that part of the reason it's been blown up into such a huge issue in the way it has is because Dominic Cummings is seen as basically an evil figure among sections of the liberal political and media elite who hate him. And that is partly why this has been blown up in the way it has. And so it's quite clear that far from being a member of that section of the elite, is because he's challenged that section of the elite's ideology that he's been treated in the way he has politically and in the media in recent days. Again, I'm not saying that I support his views or their views or that one section of the elite is right. I just think it's completely missing the point to claim that somehow breaching the guidelines means he's part of that elite, because that's an ideological elite, and his hypocrisy or alleged hypocrisy in relation to the guidelines doesn't mean that he shares all the same ideological values as those people. That's just a short video I wanted to make because I thought it was important to make that distinction. Again, I'm not saying he hasn't behaved hypocritically, and I think it might make sense for people to be genuinely annoyed by that, and the media should be allowed to scrutinise it. But there's an important distinction to be drawn, and this often applies nowadays between the specific issue at hand and the way in which it's blown up into a story, often with misleading facts, often misreported, often by politicians who endorse things which really they shouldn't be endorsing on the basis of basically political differences. And I think that's a concern. And I also think the political liberal left is particularly at fault for doing that in relation to people like Dominic Cummings over the last few years. Okay, that's it. It's just a short video today. I make a bunch of podcasts and videos on this channel. It's the E2 Review podcast. You can check out the podcast version or you can watch the videos here. Just give this a like and leave some comments if you agree with it, because that helps the channel grow. Also hit the subscribe button and the bell button, because that will let you keep up to date with all the newest videos. Okay, thanks for watching.